Good afternoon. My name is Adam Hamilton. I'm going to be talking today. Our agenda is about creating views, some of the common settings, developing schedules with some of the new tools that Revit 2015 offers. The intent of this webinar is to help educate some of our interior and lighting folks about the capabilities that Revit has. Some of the more common questions or concerns that we hear from our clients is how Revit is geared towards the major architectural, the major mechanical, the major plumbing and other industries, and not so much focused or set up for them, for you guys. The tools that Revit has lends itself to aiding interiors and lighting folks with creating their documents and setting up their views, really helping the design come forward. And a lot of times it's just a lack of knowledge or a misunderstanding of some of the tools that Revit provides that can aid in the creation of these views. So some of the views and settings that I'll be looking at were collected from questions I have received during trainings, aided companies in document creation, and so these are just some of the lessons that I have learned. We're going to have a quick poll. Just one of the questions that we're going to be asking is that when you insert content elements into your Revit project, how smart are they? And we're just trying to gauge some where some of our attendees are, and based on the answers you're using, it's important for us to gauge these questions to see how our clients or how other people in the industry are utilizing Revit. Some of the benefits that Revit has is that it's on a sliding gray scale, the gray scale of BIM, we like to call it. Some people wade in just a little bit and use placeholder contents. Some companies develop it a little bit more, so they're starting to add intelligent information, but just the basics. And then some companies go and utilize and build and download very intelligent content that includes a lot of specific data and a lot of specific settings. Some of these things we'll be displaying during our webinar today just to give you an idea of what those look like, but it's just a good idea to gauge where our audience is coming from. Well, with 54% of listeners voting in, it's a very mixed bag, with 35% coming in as just placeholder elements, 20% is starting user content, but it's excellent to see that 45% of respondents so far are using intelligent content that do provide specific data and settings. So we're going to continue now that I have a good idea of the mixed team that we have going. We'll begin my demonstration. We'll take a look at a little project that I've been working with for the past couple days, just kind of setting up and getting ready to show all of you. Now, this particular project I have in front of me is a dental office, and I use this because it is a build out. So it has some existing, it has some new construction, and a lot of times the firms we get questions from. This is a typical at least scope of work for what they do. The first thing to note is that Revit is an Autodesk product. As with all the other Autodesk products that either come in the design suite or can be purchased separately, it works very well with other Autodesk products. The AutoCAD regular AutoCAD architecture, it has exportability to 3ds Max, it has exportability to Showcase, and so it's the first thing I wanted to discuss is that when companies do switch over or are looking into switching over to Revit, that that you're not losing the functionality of the CAD documents that you may have had, or that because you're now in Revit you can't use CAD documents. From the Insert tab here, we have this first link panel, and inside the Revit environment, linking is how we can bring other files into our new project. And as you can see from my screen by the colors, I have already brought in a CAD document, but it's good to know that the CAD files that can be brought in aren't specific to just, say, an AutoCAD DWG. We have many companies who we've been contacted by utilizing DWG exports from other applications. DWG exports, we know that Herman Miller uses a proprietary application to do layouts, but it only exports in DWG. So that Revit does have the ability to bring in these DWG files. If you're using legacy files, so an older project, the client comes to you and says, hey, well, we have this project, but unfortunately we only have it in DWG, you can bring those in. DGN files for old MicroStation files, and the ability to bring in SAT files, which in case you haven't been using them, you can bring in equipment from Inventor, from ProE, SolidWorks. These types of files can come in an SAT format. And then also it can bring in SketchUp, so that we talk about the power of Revit and what Revit can do, but we also know that several of our clients out there still utilize SketchUp models, and that you are able to bring them in, though they lack a lot of the intelligence that the Revit model can create. But it's just good to know that these are here. And then when we bring in these files, it's important to know that these files can be three-dimensional. Even though DWGs are widely thought to be 2D, one of the things that we'll be seeing from the file that I used was that it did come from a three-dimensional, either AutoCAD architecture or a different application that spit out 3D CAD. And so that it is something to keep in mind as we're working. The other thing that's important to know is many people who open up the default template, the default architectural template, realize that there's only one floor plan per level, and that a lot of people try to stick a lot of information inside the one view. And it's important to note that Revit isn't all about singular views. The intent of Revit is a big empty room, and we're building our building inside it, and there's different ways of seeing, different way of slicing through that singular model to display the information we want to see, and that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. View creation is an important part of particularly interiors and lighting, due to the fact that we're looking at multiple things. We're not just trying to put in where are the walls and doors, but we need to convey the fact that we have floor finishes. We need to convey the fact that we have furniture and equipment and electrical and lighting. And so creating additional views is an important part. In the project browser on the left, you can see that I've already generated some views. Some of the ones that are important to what we're going to be looking at, that are important to you, are the fact that in this case, this building, we have existing and we have new construction. A lot of times the work we get requested information about are phased projects. There are build-outs, they're tenant improvements, and there is a frequent misunderstanding of how phasing works and how views work. On the Manage tab, we do have a phasing button, and here you'll notice we have existing and new construction, and we have phase filters, and the phase filters are what tells the Revit view what to show. And so the default setting for level 1, the default setting that we see in its view properties, so nothing selected in the view properties, the phase filter is typically shown set to show all. Now, the problem with this is show all doesn't just show all. Show all displays every piece, new, It shows existing, it shows demo, and it shows temporary all at the same time. And so show all, even though it's set as default, is not the correct phase filter that we want to use. So note, first step of opening anything is definitely going to be setting these phase filters. A new construction plan wouldn't be show all, it's going to be previous and new. And what that means is it's going to show previous in an existing fashion, and then it's going to show new construction in the bold line types. And so it's important to know that you have to set that first. And then phase is important because phase dictates what we're drawing at. So even though I can draw a wall or a door or a window, the phase of the view that's set will show whether it is drawing on the new construction phase or on the existing phase. And so down here in my project browser, I had that level 1, that default view. And if you right click on it, you have the ability to duplicate views. And so you can choose that level 1 from the default template and duplicate it as many times as you feel you're going to need views. Now, I duplicated and created an existing plan and renamed it, a demo plan and renamed it. I created a finished plan and renamed it, and the electrical plan and renamed it. Renaming views is also very important, as you can see, sorting, and it's we don't like unnamed views or default name views, because a lot of times you lose what it is you're looking for. And believe me, when I've worked in projects inside Revit, at the end of 1 week we could have over 100 3D views. And so good naming standards is always important. With the level 1 existing view, a lot of times this view isn't going to be used for anything more than the prep work for our file, maybe linking in the CAD, bringing it in and drawing in the existing condition. Another thing to note is that the world of Revit, not every view, not everything we create, not every schedule or elevation is meant for public consumption. A lot of times what we generate inside Revit can be used for the benefit of the team rather than destined for the document set. Okay. So having an existing view allows you to generate any information that pertains to the existing condition before we get to the new construction. The other thing to note is that the phase filter and the phase needs to be set for those views. So show all could work inside the existing condition. However, something that some people frequently misunderstand is by showing previous phase, because they're thinking that existing is a previous phase. Previous phase means previous to whatever phase this view is set at. So if the phase is set to existing, a previous phase doesn't exist. There's nothing created before, and if you notice, all of my non-CAD objects have now disappeared because in this view nothing has come before existing. So new or all will work in an existing environment because currently in this phase we are showing everything as it exists. Okay. The other thing to note is when we had brought in our CAD document, I said that CAD works very well in the Revit environment, and that is true. There are some tools that we can use to manipulate this CAD document. With the CAD selected in the background, we have up on the ribbon a button called Query. This button will allow you to select objects. If you notice highlighting on the screen, selecting objects inside the CAD document, even though we're in the Revit environment. And it will give you information pertaining to that piece, such as the layer. When I said that it does play well with the CAD, it does. It actually sees the objects that are getting placed. It gives the layer or level, if you're using MicroStation, that particular line is on, and you have the ability to hide that object or hide in view that layer. So you can do it from this view, or even from visibility graphics. on the View tab, Visibility Graphics, or shortcut VG or VV, there is the Imported Categories tab. Here I can find that LinkedIn CAD file, and if I expand it, you can see that all the CAD all the CAD layers that are available in there able to be seen. The other thing to note is if something in this CAD file is not readily easily seen, that you can override the line colors from the Revit file to something that maybe is a little bit more easy to see. So I could choose, say, a darker color. And can help aid in drawing on top of this work. Clear that out. Okay. Once these files are brought in and we start to generate our views, again, we have our existing views. Our demo views are set up, and again, it's just careful management of phasing. To create demo, it's an understanding that we're showing what's previous, and we're going to show the things that aren't going to be there. But the way that Revit knows is that the view itself is new construction. It's saying, hey, I'm in the new construction portion, and I want to be able to see what's existing and going to remain, but I want you to show me what is being destroyed before we get to the new construction. And so that's what the properties in this view are set up for. That's a common thing that people a common issue that people do is that they may possibly create a phase and call it a demo, and that's a dangerous thing to do because you don't get to, Revit already does demo for you, so we don't like using demo phases. It's a transitional phase. It's saying that something is happening between existing and new construction, and Revit already knows how to display that information. Okay. Once we get back to our existing views, it's very important to know that it's not just one view. It's several different views that we get to generate. And it's not just that one view, but we also have the ability to create callouts, create additional ceiling plans. Here I have a standard ceiling plan and then a lighting ceiling plan. And we have these plans because each plan gets created has the view settings and view filters and things that we can apply to the view to get our information across. Some of the first things we're going to look at are view filters. From my level 1 floor plan, I can go into Visibility Graphics. And view filters are important because there's a lot of times we say, hey, I want to see things like I want to see furniture. But furniture is a category. Sometimes I want to modify things within that category. I want to see all of furniture so it's all there, but maybe I have things like not in contract. These are pieces of furniture that some may be having to show as normal, but sometimes we want to show things differently. And so how do we do that? Off the Filters tab, we can create new filters. Adding in filters, we can create a new one through the Edit New Filters. Down here at the bottom, there's the little piece of paper with the star on it. Some people don't know that that is the New button. And I can create a new filter called Not in Contract. From here, I can choose the categories of objects that this Not in Contract applies to. Now, I know when I started setting this up that I did want it to affect things such as casework. Maybe there's things that my company provides, or that there's things that the owner will need to provide. So I'll choose casework. I can choose things like, let's see, furniture and furniture systems. Those can be selected. Starting with 2014, we had access to the generic models, and so what I'd like to do is include that too. And I usually include that just as a default because if I'm making content or if I have someone else making content for me, a lot of times that some placeholder content will be brought in as a generic model, or maybe there might be a piece that was brought through that might require you to include generic models. So it's always a good thing to include. Lighting fixtures and possibly lighting devices. Mechanical equipment, and that's just that's a possibility. The intent is we're trying to set this up on in a way that is useful later on, and it, versus what do I just need it for just now. And specialty equipment is always a good one to have. Now the filter rules. It's important to know that filters work off of parameter data. So the parameters that we load in or are already included from categories inside Revit, so whether it's furniture, whether it's equipment, the parameters assigned to those elements, that is what you can filter by. I had early on created a parameter called not in contract. From the More Parameters list, I can choose my project parameters, and here I see not in contract. And it's possible that it did not include one of the elements I had created, and I believe it was lighting fixtures, so I might have to come back to that later, but that's not a problem. I'll grab just the furniture and the lighting elements that I do know I assigned it to previously. Here it is, not in contract, equals yes or no. I'm going to choose yes because the filter I want is to say, hey, these elements that are not in contract, I want to apply to this. It's good to know that filters are rather a selection set. It doesn't determine what will happen to it. It's just the fact that we are going to choose elements with this parameter, and we are going to do something, but we don't know what yet. So I've added not in contract to my filter list. Now again, filters, they're a selection set, and so we have the ability to say A, turn them on or off, or B, override them in some way. Now some of the clients, this is a workflow that they particularly use. Not in contract elements are, they typically will show something as, say, hidden. And so we'll do some line work overrides, and we'll change this to a hidden line type. So I'll choose hidden from the list. Same way from that, if there's a different color, now typically it's going to have the solid black default furniture or whatever category that it belongs to. But if you'd like to have, say, a dark grayscale, this is again the portion where you would include it for these not in contract elements. Okay. Other times, they also want to see these elements as transparent. They want to know where they may or may not be located, but they want to be able to see through them in case there's elements such as power outlets, or maybe they just want to see the floor finish on its way through. So we can override those elements too. So turning the transparency of these elements up. Sometimes we'll do a 50, so you'll get a partial see-through. Other times they'll turn them completely transparent. Okay. From here, I can accept the OK button, and actually at the same time, I want to turn off my CAD so we can see the things that we are modifying. And so in this reception room, I have several chairs. And if we said, hey, these chairs, you know what? We want to give a good idea where they're going to be located, but this is going to be a by owner element. So I can grab these chairs. And here in the properties, I now see not in contract. And if I choose not in contract and apply it, our visibility filter has been turned on. And now these chairs, separate from these chairs, even though they're both furniture elements, one set has the overrides applied and the other set does not. This is something that a lot of people use, not just for furniture, but for, say, equipment. A lot of times we have clients who do, say, fast food chains or franchisees, and certain things are supplied by the franchise owner, and certain things are supplied by the company that they're doing. And so those similar filters can be added in a similar fashion to those pieces of equipment so that we can see them separately. So we have view filters. The other thing is getting the walls to look the way we want them to look. Inside, say, a finish plan, we've had the question on how do I make the walls dark? How do I make, or how do I highlight those in? Now there's two options that we look at, because from any wall, if I select a wall, from any wall we have an edit type, and there is a coarse scale fill pattern option. And where we can choose the solid fill and the dark color, whether black, whether a dark gray, and we hit apply. Depending on its phase, it may or may not show. And it only affects one wall type at a time. So you would have to go into each individual wall type. Here's my generic 5, but my generic 7 didn't change, and my exterior wall, generic 8, did not update either. I would have to go into each and every one. Also note that phase does have an effect on this. So even though I could have an override set, because this wall is phased, the phasing overrides dictate what will be shown. If we wanted to know that we're going to be doing all walls, I can go into Visibility Graphics, and under Model Categories, you can set all walls that are cut to have a solid pattern and an infill. And this, regardless of type, will show. Now, to get phased walls to include, again, the phase override always wins. There is the option inside the phase filter to, instead of previous and new, you can show complete. This won't show the demo, but it shows the existing, and it shows new construction without overrides, without the phasing overrides. And so here we can see the entire view has the updates as necessary. Now, some of the times we have view settings that do come into play. A lot of times within a ceiling plan, and again, the CAD gets in the way, so I'm going to turn this off here. We have requests that, the default Revit ceiling plan doesn't show doors, doesn't show door headers. And that's true, because the intent of a 3D model is that we take a slice through it. And where do we take a slice through it? In the properties, if I scroll down, we have something called the view range. Now, if I was to edit the view range, we'll see that the primary range, the cut plane, is at 7'6", which is typically higher than any standard door, which is why we typically don't see doors. This can be lowered, and usually a good number I like to work with is 6'6". And now I can see that my door is within my view. However, panels and swings typically aren't shown on a ceiling plan. Again, going into Visibility Graphics, another thing to note is that from here, people just think that you can turn on or off the entire category. Sliding this to the side so that we can see some doors in the background. Doors is a category, but it has a tree view next to it. And if we expand the tree under doors, we'll see what are called the subcategories of doors. Now, this allows you to either modify things such as the plan swing or the panel, and either visibly turn it on or off and apply, and you'll see that those have now disappeared. It's important to note that inside there, if there were things such as glass, that those would need to be disabled as well. So we have these same settings that may be shown in elevation but also shown in plan, but we have to make sure that we turn off the elements without turning off the door. Okay, so utilizing the view range and modifying things such as the subcategories of the visibility graphics, we're able to get these views to look how we'd like as well. Other things that are important are, in case something is above or below that cut plane, one of the misused or not used enough elements is on the View tab. And it's under Plan Views. There's something called a Plan Region. Now, the Plan Region allows you to place a box around a specific area that allows you to display things that are above or below. So it lets you utilize a custom cut plane in just one area. Now, the other buttons inside this drop-down are for creating new plans. Plan Region is the only button here that affects an area within an existing plan. So in case there was something that we did want to see or didn't want to see, I could create a Plan Region that affects just these objects. And it's important to know that plan regions don't print. But we can affect the view range of this plan region and set it at, say, 9 feet instead of lower. And that will modify the elements that it does touch. And here we now do not see that opening in this view, whereas the rest of the model is still affected by the main global cut plane. So that happens to be, again, on the View tab, Plan Views, the drop-down Plan Regions. It's a very important element that few people actually use or use effectively that we get requested information about. Okay. Now, after creating these views, after taking the time and effort to generate the view filters, setting up your parameters, setting up the settings for those view filters, a lot of times we're not talking about just one floor, just one area. Sometimes it's not just this one project. The ability to utilize these settings repeatedly and in a typical fashion, again, something I chime in each and every time about are view templates. So once we have these settings, creating a view template from this view and calling it R, interior ceiling plan. Okay. We now have this set inside our project. Again, if this template is saved to our, this view template is saved to our normal project template or starter project, it's something that we can reuse each and every time. And some of the things that we can set up, including those visibility graphic overrides, the filters once they're created, those phasings that we've already set, including things like the depth clipping. Okay, and the view range. We can set for these views in a default fashion. There's one last thing I wanted to show because one of the things, and I'm going to hop over to my lighting plan, that people always request is, how do I see furniture in the background? A lot of times when creating lighting and creating lighting plans, we want to know where elements are in the plan. And those elements, because maybe they help dictate where we want to have lights over tables, centered over tables. Maybe we have library stacks. Maybe we have restaurants and bar areas where we want to see things in plan view while in our ceiling plan to generate those views, line things up, get them centered. And so one of the things that people don't know is our underlays. Here I have in my plan, we see in ceiling plan I have my grids and I have my ceiling, but I also see the equipment and some of the furniture from the floor plan in this view. And how I got that in is by setting the level 1 underlay. But it's important to know that when you bring in an underlay, it by default takes the orientation of the view. However, you can change the direction of the underlay between plan or ceiling. And so from a reflected ceiling plan, we would lose those, we'd lose some of those settings, or we'd be looking in the opposite direction. So sometimes we need to switch it around to turn to plan view. And so when that's in and applied, it will have an effect on the background that gets brought in. So we can utilize this to do our layouts. Okay. Again, this is another setting that can be modified inside these view templates. The last thing I want to talk about is annotation items. One of the big things that I hear from interiors people, from lighting people, is that you know, the views that Revit makes are not all that nice, and it's not necessarily the plan views, but views such as the interior elevations. So I'm going to jump into my interior elevations here. And here I have some content placed and I have the view in the background. But what I've also done is utilize a masking region. Here you can see what Revit would default give you. We see things such as the floor, such as the adjacent walls, and a lot of times the default interior elevation attempts to align the crop region with the wall edges, with the floor edges, with the ceiling edges, and we don't get that nice clean look that we've been generating in CAD for a long time. So one of the first steps I like to do is pull away the crop region just a little bit on each side so I can see those elements. Okay. And then I will utilize a masking region in reverse. Masking regions typically allow for the masking of model elements, and you would typically mask out what you did want to see. However, what I did in this case is mask out the things, is create an inverted masking region. And I'm just going to edit the boundary here. As you can see, what I did was generate the boundary around my view, including things I didn't want to see, such as I clipped out this piece of casework, which I knew I was slicing through, or sometimes soffits. Okay. I've even added in some nice detail elements, such as the kick or the backsplash. Sometimes I'll include, if I have an angle over here, I'd include carpet trim, and this is just to give a nice border around the view. And then what I'll come back and do is create the inverse option, because if I was to accept this right now, it would mask everything inside it. But if I was to create a rectangle outside the crop region, which is why I had left it on here, what it's now going to do is mask between the original masking line and then this new outer line I added. And what this will do is then mask out those wall elements, the construction elements, the floor elements. And if I accept that sketch, you'll see it masks out those pieces. And then I'll go and turn off the crop region, and I'll have a nice boundary around my view. The other thing is that line work. A big thing we get asked a lot and is how much do you detail? And it's important to know that there are certain times when you want to detail model elements that you typically wouldn't show, such as carpet trim or crown molding. If you're doing a presentation, if you're doing an interior perspective rendering, you might want to show those elements for the sake of the rendering. And so we'd recommend generating it only in that location and actually making it even a work set that can be turned on or off, because you don't want to add it everywhere. That'll slow down the model, especially if it's in an area that you're not going to be creating a perspective for anyway. What you can do is in your interior elevations, you can punch up the model using the Revit content, default Revit content, or default objects in the background, utilizing line work as well. And so what I'll come back in and do is choose some of these elements and align those pieces to the model. And so you can have line work, you can have masking regions, and even filled regions, so hatch patterns, with the model in the background. So it's important to know that we can use those. I was having a conversation the other day with a lady, who had, she was placing, Revit has these casework elements. They have these cabinets, but they don't have the nice designs and stuff like that. And I had asked her, um, do you know how to make custom content? And she's like, no, I don't really know how. And I was like, well, what you can do is, are you going to be seeing this in perspective? Are you going to be using this in a rendering? And she said, no, this is just for the construction documents. Well, you can use detail line work to punch things up. And so I can create things like half-inch offset, and clean up the line work. And so we can make really nice looking 2D 2D elements within this view. And she was satisfied for that for now, and though she's going to be looking into some additional training, but it was good for her to know that you are not just solely limited by the 3D capabilities. It's knowing that the 2D capabilities are still inside inside Revit. Okay. And so we can use the 2D tools to punch up the project without bogging down the project, because sometimes too much detail is too much for your computer to handle, especially depending on the size of the project and the amount of detail that you're trying to provide the client. So utilizing masking regions. The other thing is by default with these detail lines, you'll see the line styles drop down. It's a very small amount of lines. It also doesn't include things like grayscale. And so having the ability to generate new line styles is a benefit as well. So on the Manage tab under the Additional Settings button, there are things such as line styles. And you'll see that there is an abundance of predetermined line styles, but having more. You'll see that thin lines is 1, medium lines 3, and wide is 5. But if ever you needed a thicker line, geez, they just don't have it. So you can create new line styles or modify line styles. And so you could say, create a thin lines with a, say, a 70% shaded. And here, thin lines matching 1-to-1, but instead I want a grayscale. So instead of black, I can choose a dark gray or even modify it a little bit more. And now I have a grayscale line weight. The other thing that I typically do is there are certain default lines, such as room separation lines. They come in black by default, and we don't want to mistake them for, say, a floor edge or something else. So I always like to modify my room separation line. Here I turned it a nice purple. Sometimes people will change it to a hidden line type as well. That way, in case it is overlapping something like a material transition, we can take a look. We can see it more readily as a hidden line weight. So utilizing the ability to create additional lines, additional line weights. It's important to know that line weights go up to a 16, but that is entirely too big. So it would be good to create more steps up. And the ability to create different shades. So having the grayscale option as well as the black option allows us to have different depth of line weights behind it, and the patterning that we can use. And sometimes it's important to know this patterning because of the size. A lot of people will just use the default line sizes and modify scale as necessary, but you could come in and create, I know we used to have hidden and hidden X2 options for line styles, and so having the ability to generate more line styles that are more usable inside your project is a good thing. And it might be an important time to take a look at your standards and set those up for the future as well. So we're going to hit OK, and just as a demonstration, I'm going to go back to annotation under detail lines. We see thin lines 70% shaded, and so now that is an option I can use to add in grayscale elements. Okay, so masking regions are an important use in creating interior and interior drawings. Line types are very important. The other thing to note is that in CAD, we had the ability to create center lines because inside a room, this wall, this particular back wall, you'd be able to find the middle or find the midpoint between a lot of these things. Well, because of the nature of Revit and the fact that this wall isn't just this room, but it actually spans multiple rooms, that the midpoint is not easily accessible or at least relevant to our space. I still use construction lines. I still use annotation, 2D line work, choose a hidden or a center line, and I will create construction lines to help find midpoint, SM, to find the center lines of rooms and modify as necessary to add in light fixtures, to add to coordinate other detail elements. So it's good to know that those are still there. I still use them, and then again, either I'll remove them, or one of the other view types I haven't talked about is creating something such as a working plan. And so having a view specific to just things like my my detail line work or my dimensions, I can create a working plan. And in here, I can have things like center lines and all sorts of other lines on and active where I can see those pieces and place them. Now, creating views and dropping in elements, we're running low on time, so I wanted to take a moment and talk about other things. After we have views, the content we place, it's important to know that there's a lot of content available nowadays. On the Insert tab, we have things such as Seek, where we can find furniture, find lighting, and you'll be able to see families that are able to be downloaded with intelligent content. And here's a couple elements that I've already downloaded. And not just Revit files, but also DWGs and SketchUp. So there's a lot of content being generated online. Manufacturers are really taking off and have been for the last couple years. And so there's a lot of available content out there. Here in my project, I brought in a lot of elements, and so it's important to talk about good content. That was part of the poll question. Placeholder content, default Revit content, such as basic cabinets, but then we can step up to actual manufacturer-specific information, such as this Hayworth chair. And you'll see the intelligence built into some of this content, such as the URL, the product name, number, who actually built it. And so there's a lot of things, including materials and materializations, that we can utilize, and a lot of that is information that we're already calling out in different locations. Those contents, along with the new Revit tools regarding scheduling. Here I built a furniture schedule, and here you can see all the information. This is just default information that was automatically loaded. In 2015, we even got a new parameter called type images. And so now if I jump to a sheet, you'll see a schedule that I brought in, that same schedule that has images loaded in. And so now I can have images included in my schedule. Okay, that image is part of the family, and if I select my floor plan and select this particular chair, okay, it has edit type, a type image that's loaded in, and that type image can be loaded from the Edit family and the Properties. And here I have, under Identity Data, Type Image. And this is an image that I loaded myself, that I downloaded from the internet, took a screenshot, brought it into, just Microsoft Paint, and clipped out just the image file itself. Once it's part of the, once the image is part of the family, it will travel with it wherever it goes. The other thing is well, when these families are brought in, they are now in 2014 became room aware, and so they know what room they belong in. And so if I was to jump back inside my Revit project, I can create schedules that know what room they're in. And so here I have the room number, the room name, and the furniture in that room number. Now this particular schedule is actually a room schedule, and if I jump into fields, you'll see that it is a room schedule with an embedded schedule built in. This particular embedded schedule has furniture. Okay. Other ways to do this are saying I have a furniture schedule or a multi-category schedule. Here's a multi-category schedule where you're able to pull in parameters from the categories, or from this drop box you can choose room to select parameters related to the room, including its number, its name. And so from here I've chosen to show the room number, the room name, and then the different furniture elements inside this inside these rooms. So these elements now know what room they're in and where they belong. And again, you can see here the image, at least the name here, until it's brought onto sheet, and then you can see the image itself. Okay, so schedules can be generated to utilize images now, to utilize all that intelligent data that can be brought with the families. You can build embedded schedules, such as our room schedule, with access to furniture families categories, such as specialty equipment, furniture, lighting, and get the quantification per room. And so there's a lot of things that Revit can do that are specific to this industry, specific to the interiors groups, the lighting groups, and it's just a matter of setup. And a lot of times the setup, once it's created, can be added back into your templates, into your starter projects, and are reusable each and every time. With that, I believe we're going to take a look at some questions or talk about some up-and-coming events.
Okay, thanks, Adam. Got upcoming events here with CAD Technology Center. Just want to let you know about and also as questions keep coming in here, we'll address these shortly after these events. But tomorrow we have a webinar from GlobalScape, and we'll be looking at how multiple offices in different cities or different locations can use one product to collaborate. And then this Friday we also have a simulation CFD for the AEC industry. And that's having Sid talk about how to leverage the simulation products within the AEC application. And then also, we have Midwest University, and we've been accepting abstracts from instructors from all over the U.S. And last year we had, just this past March, we had Midwest University here at the Minneapolis Convention Center. And I see some of the people today joining us for this webinar were actually in attendance at that. But just want to encourage you, if you have a workflow or any kind of new technology that you've been researching or using at your firm, it may be beneficial for you to teach a class here in Minneapolis and share with your peers that knowledge. So it'd be great to have you. Go on our website, midwest-u.com. So with that, I'd like to hand it back over to Adam with questions. And Adam, our first question here is, what if I'm working with linked models? Or talking about the underlay option is not always available with linked models.
Sure, and yep, that's an important part. When you're using linked models that you can have, or there is an issue with underlay options in linked models, sometimes what I would do there is I would just modify the view range of the ceiling plan to include or to be dropped down to a floor plan level, or if there's a specific area you want to work, we talked about the plan regions. So if there were elements inside that you wanted to include or take a look at, that you can use either plan regions or drop the view range adjustment down to a level that would include those pieces. And it's important to know that typically furniture families, specialty equipment, some mechanical equipment, furniture systems, they're not cuttable, which means as long as they're touched by the cut plane, they will display themselves in the view. So a lot of times you don't have to get super low. You don't have to get down to, say, a foot. Typically you can get down to, say, 3 feet. Uh, or just under 3 feet, and that'll include most elements before it hits things that are, say, on the floor. The second question we have here is, as an owner, he was interested in lighting fixtures and that can expect maintenance based on time, and looking at utilizing the Autodesk Kobe 2 extension. Any suggestions on extra info within the elements properties? One thing to note with the Kobe tools, whether it's the Autodesk Kobe tool or I know our CTC Kobe tool, they add parameters, Kobe specific parameters to the families. There's a button you click to add parameters. So a lot of that information gets manually included. Another question we have is, why would room numbers not be listed in the lighting fixture schedule when the parameter is listed? Be listed. Um, the parameters and the parameters that we get or have access to are specific to either the room information or the lighting or furniture information. So we're trying to utilize both. There is some limitations that I had showed regarding the embedded schedules, that there isn't a way to tie in between the two schedules. You're able to list elements such as lighting, such as furniture between, or that are included in the rooms uh, per room, but you're not able to tie in such as lumens per square footage. So area of the room is a parameter for the room, and lumens would be a parameter for lighting, and so you're not able to tie between the two. That is a limitation. We have had workflows developed utilizing, say, our spreadsheet link to bring smart info from one category of object into a placeholder parameter inside another one, so we could tie those things together and then create a calculated value, which is a possibility using some of our other tools such as Spreadsheet Link.